Alright my friends, Alex here and welcome to another one as always. Today we're going to be discussing the display property in CSS, and it's one of the most fundamental properties. It is in fact the most important property when it comes to working with layout. What we will not be doing in this video today is we will not be covering flexbox and grid, because these require pretty much almost separate videos, full-fledged videos. They're probably going to be like an hour or more long, because flex and grid are two advanced layout concepts, and these are in fact the way that we do modern layout, CSS layout today. So the stuff that we're going to discuss in today's video will include display none, inline block, and block. And so let's get started basically. Yes, so essentially, if you remember from the previous video when we discussed the document flow, we learned that the browser sets some default values to all of the elements, right? So let's actually start there. So we're gonna start with the display block. So if you remember, headings and paragraphs and many other HTML tags, by default, because user agent style sheet, the built-in browser CSS file sets these to display block. Display block, or a block type of property, is a property that occupies the full width of the page. So if we inspect this element and we hover over this box model computed view, you can see that this blue line spans all across the screen, which means that the block level elements, they occupy full width. Now, we can talk about philosophy, why that is, and if you logically think about it, the reason for that is simple. If you look at the physical book, if you're reading some book, if you're writing an essay in your school, university, whatever, your PhD, you know that headings in general always occupy full width of the physical page or a digital web page, as we are looking at now. Same goes with paragraphs. Paragraphs generally span full width of the page in most cases in physical books or in digital world like websites, right? So there's a lot of correlation between why some of the browser defaults are what they are with the actual real world, right? So when it comes to the function of display block, if you ever need some element in your HTML and CSS to occupy the full width of the page, you're going to say, hey, I want you to be of type block, display block, right? Now the next one we're going to be discussing is going to be inline, display inline, right? Display inline, there are also many default elements in HTML and CSS. One of the most common ones is anchor tags. So if I say, hey, this link is programmer.network, sign up at programmer.network platform, right? If I put this tag inside of this paragraph in here, you will notice that this link now is in line with the rest of the text. So this display inline fundamentally means, hey, I want this element to be in line with some other element. And keep in mind, we're going to be doing inline block and inline, and then we're going to learn the fundamental difference between them. So for now, you will notice that the reason why inline elements exist and why some of the defaults are what they are is that in most cases, for example, the anchor tag that you have is generally some part of the text, right? So that's why by default it's inline. The most common inline element that you're going to be using is going to be a span, right? So let's imagine that here I say, hi, my name is Alexander and I'm 35 years old, right? So if I save this thing, let's imagine that we wanted to style some of these things. Let's imagine that I wanted to maybe make this thing bold and maybe my age bold to emphasize something in here. I could put them in a span, for example, like this, right? And I can take number 35, and then I can add some class to these guys, right? So let's say here, let's imagine we want to create a utility class in our CSS file called, let's say, text bold, for example, right? And I'm going to add this class to both of the spans, text bold. And then if I go over here, I'm going to create that class and I'm going to say font weight bold, right? So now if I refresh, you can see, oh wow, okay, these things are now bold. So you can see that the reason why span is an inline element is because we don't want it to break the document flow in our HTML document. We don't want these things to go to occupy the full width of the page. Actually, if we just override the default behavior of a span and we say display block, you will notice that this sentence no longer is going to make sense, because this Alexander now and 35, since they're block type elements, right, they're now occupying the full width of the page, hence they're breaking our sentence. Our sentence now is separated into multiple rows, so that doesn't make sense. So display inline, unlike display block, display inline doesn't break the document flow, and the width and height of display inline are automatically determined. This is also very important to understand. So if I inspect this element, right, and we take a look at this box model here under maybe computed, you can see for the inside of the content, if I actually scroll a little bit down, when I hover over this, you can see that it says auto. So width is auto, height is auto. So in simple words, you cannot use width and height CSS properties with the elements of type display inline. If I come now to my spans and I try to set width and height, I say width, let's say 100, height 100, you will notice that nothing's going to actually happen, right? So your box model here will show, in fact, that you did set the width and height, and you actually did, but that's not going to be that's simply going to be neglected by the browser, ignored, because display inline elements do not take width and height. So that is you can see here actually on the span now that there's this little exclamation icon, exclamation mark. If I hover over it, it says the display inline property prevents width from having an effect. Try setting display to something other than inline. And it's the same if I hover over here. It's going to say the display inline property prevents height from having an effect. So in simple words, whenever you have something of type display inline, you can't really set width and height on it, because it's an inline element. It's supposed to go together with the rest of the text, and it's not supposed to interrupt or disrupt or break the document flow. All right, so now we know what the block is, what an inline is. Let's cover inline block, right? An inline block used to be a king of the layout for many, many years, until we got flexbox and grid. So for many years, for more than a decade and a half, maybe approximately, we used display inline block to put boxes next to each other, right? So so let's do that. So let's remove all of this HTML let's start clean. And let's create 3 boxes. I'm going to say box, and I'm going to say box 1, and I'm going to create 2 more boxes, right? I've just created some CSS class box, so we can style it. And here I'm going to say box. I'm going to say width 100 pixels, height 100 pixels, and background, let's say, for now, let's say aquamarine. So if I do this, you can see we have 3 boxes because we haven't fiddled with the display property on them yet. We know that divs, they occupy full width of the page, which is why these things are actually now, as you can see, below each other, right? So you can see this guy and this guy and this guy, they're not allowing anything to fill in this white blank space, right? So if I come here now and say display inline block, you will notice now that they are in fact next to each other. So easy, right? And again, this little change in display property is how we used to build websites for so many years. So whenever we needed to put things next to each other, 2 boxes next to each other, 3 boxes, a number of boxes, you would say display inline block. Now, just to add a detail that I just noticed here is that if you remember in the last video or 1 or 2 videos ago, we discussed how the browser sets default styles, right? You can see that now when we use this inline thing, you can see that there's this little margin in there, right? So what is this margin? Because you can see if we take a look at the box model of any of these documents, there isn't any margin set on them. You can see margin is non-existent. There's no margin on any sides. If we search here for margin inside of the actual computed properties, there's also no margins, right? Well, there is an actual hidden margin between these elements when you use display inline block. And if I come here and I say margin right -4 pixels, we're going to reset that margin between them. Why am I mentioning this? So what it is that I want you to memorize. So do I want you to memorize this? Absolutely not. This is absolutely relevant because at the first place, you will not be using display inline block in a modern web today to do layout. What I actually want you to get out of this is that there are some of those browser quirks or whatever you want to call that you will just notice over time, and then you will learn over time by working. So if I go to Google and I say, or if I go to, if we go to ChatGPT right over here and we say, why is there a margin between elements in CSS when I use display inline block, right? So you could ask this question on Google or whatever, and let's see what it says. When you use display inline block in CSS, you might notice a small margin between elements. This happens because the inline block elements are treated similar to inline elements like characters in text. This means that there any white space in the HTML, blah, blah, blah. So in the context of rendering, so this is not to get into the details of this. Again, the point isn't this margin. The point is that there are many tricks in the CSS and HTML world that you will learn by working. And you're going to notice here that it says modern CSS layouts like Flexbar or Grid don't have this white space issue, so using them can avoid the problems entirely. So you can see that there is some white space issue that existed before we had these tools like Flexbox and Grid, and that's why we saw what we saw. So there's always going to be some quirks, no matter what, in JavaScript, HTML, CSS, any language, and the point here is, the takeaway is, you will learn these things. So you certainly don't have to memorize this. Okay, great. So now we can see the display inline block essentially sets elements next to each other, and that's awesome, right? So there isn't much more to say there. Now, let's just stick to one single detail. So what is the difference between inline and inline block? Because you can see that both inline and inline block both function the same. They put things next to each other. Let's actually see what happens if I say display inline. We just remove this block. So what happened? And you can imagine, we just explained this 2 minutes ago. They're still next to each other, but width and height are ignored. You can actually see here that the box now, as we said before, if we hover over this, there's this little exclamation mark, and you should use this really to your advantage, especially now when you're learning CSS. If you do something that's impossible, you can see here it says, again, if I hover over it, the display inline property prevents width from having an effect. So the only difference between inline and inline block is that inline block does accept width and height, and inline doesn't. And the last property for this part of the video, or to say this video, because next video I'm going to be explaining the position property, is display none. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to color these three boxes different so I can show you I can teach you what display none is, why it makes sense, and what you're going to actually be using it for in the future. So I'm going to say box and child 1. I'm going to say background color, I don't know, I'm going to say blue violet, and I'm going to copy this 2 times. And I'm going to color these other 2 boxes with something else. I'm going to say 3. The second one is going to have this color. And the third one, I'm going to say tomato. So now we have these 3 boxes. What if we wanted to hide box 2? Well, I can come here and I can say display none. If I do so, you'll see the box is no longer displayed. We're saying display nothing. Basically, in simple words, we're saying hide this box. As you can see, there's one very important thing in here. You can see that the box itself, when we use display none, is completely removed from the document flow. It's completely removed from the document. It's not removed from the actual HTML document. You can still see it's here. And there's a reason why it's there. It's because it relates to performance-related things, but it doesn't matter. The point here is that you can see that it's completely removed from the document flow, which means any other element, if there is one, is going to take its place. Why am I saying this? Because there's another property in CSS called visibility, which hides the element but doesn't remove the document from the flow. Let me show you that. If we replace this display none with visibility, and we say visibility hidden, you will notice one major difference. The element is hidden, but the space is not removed or freed. So when will you use this property? Almost never. You will be using this for some CSS animations or transitions, but in almost no circumstances in your career you will want behavior like this, because this UI almost looks broken. It's like, why is this gap here? What is this for, right? So as you can see, there's display none and visibility are both for hiding the element, but the core difference in their function is that display none actually removes the element from the document flow. I have a video on document flow if you don't know what it means, if you skipped it. And as you can see, if I use display none, it's going to completely remove it from the document flow. Again, now the most logical question that you can ask is, Alex, why the hell would I want to hide an element? I came to this course now to learn to put things on the page and show them. So why would I want to hide the element? Very good question. So there are two occasions in which you're going to be doing this. And display none you're going to use all the time. You're not going to use it explicitly, and let me explain that. So number one, you're going to be using display none with JavaScript. So when we start writing some code, your business logic is going to determine sometimes what is shown on the screen and what not. Let me actually show you that. If I go to Programmer Network, right? And as you can see now, I'm not logged in. So you can see the only thing I can see here in the top is login button. But if I sign in, suddenly we see something different here, right? So you can see that even though display none isn't really used here, you're going to be showing and hiding certain elements based on some business logic. Hey, if I'm logged in, show this, otherwise show that. Hey, if user clicks on this button, show this, otherwise show that. So display none is going to play a huge role in that. You're going to be using it a lot. Second instance is responsive design. So when we start, I'm going to have a lesson on that. So when we start writing some more responsive design layouts, for example, hey, if I resize this page to the mobile view, I want you to show this and hide this. This is also where we're going to be using display none. So, but other than those two instances, you're not going to really be hiding elements because you're not going to be building a website which has no elements on it. It doesn't make any sense, right? So with all of these said, let's just summarize. Inline, display inline is used mostly for text. Display inline block is used to put boxes next to each other to do the layout. The difference between inline and inline block is that inline doesn't respect width and height. The block, display block, basically those are elements that occupy the full width of the page and they don't allow any other elements to interrupt the document flow, to jump in there, to occupy the available space. And then display none is used mostly for JavaScript and for responsive layout. With this summary done, let's round this video up. In the next video, we're going to discuss position property, which is the second really backbone of layout. We're going to see how we can offset elements, how we can freely move them in a more aggressive way, in a way where document flow is not respected. But we're going to have more on that in the position part. I wish you guys best. Keep on learning, keep on doing. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. Sign up on Programmer Network platform, join my streams, join our Discord. I'm very happy to help, and I'll see you guys in another one. Have a good one. Peace out. Cheers.